My mother was very much involved in the work of SACTU, the South African Congress of Trade Unions, which eventually morphed into COSATU. And my father was a professor of sociology at the university, but working very intensely for the ANC, together with Oliver Tambo, and he lectured at the camps in Angola, among other places. And in 1985, he was appointed by Oliver Tambo as the chairperson of the Constitutional Committee, on which Adam's father also served. They came back to South Africa in 1990, the first white exiles to return. My father died in 1995, and my mother in 2004. My mother, who we're going to be speaking about today, founded over 40 trade unions. She came to South Africa as a young teenager, not yet 16, or 17, sorry, in 1927, and almost immediately coming off the boat, she joined the South African, it was a Communist Party of South Africa, and got involved in union work. She got to know many very prominent people who were political activists, among them Johnny Gomez, Bill Andrews, and in 1941, she founded the Food and Canning Workers Union, which is now known as FAWU. I think the day after she founded that union, she married my father. Yes, that's correct. And throughout the 40s and 50s and 60s, they continued with their political activities. My father was a defendant in the first of the freedom trials. My mother was a founder member of the Federation of South African Women. While they were already in exile, they produced probably a book that is considered the Bible by many, many people, class and color in South Africa, 1852 to 1952. That's a brief sketch, but my mother was born in Latvia in a little shtetl called Veriklaan, one of 6 children. Not a very wealthy family. Her father was a Hebrew teacher, and he died when she was about 13. She was very, very, very bright, so she completed her schooling when she was quite young and went off when she was 15 to the capital of Latvia, Riga, to study handicrafts, I suppose, and attend courses. She had hoped to study medicine, but this was impossible for, well, there was so much anti-Semitism in Latvia at the time, and it was very difficult for her to progress, particularly as a woman. She was very much politically involved in Riga, and there was a threat that she was going to be arrested, and my grandmother, who was, of course, a widow, arranged for her to come to South Africa and join her brother and one of her sisters, who was older than her, who had already come because the intention was to get the family out of Latvia as soon as they could. And my grandmother had 2 sisters living in South Africa. So my mother, from the late 20s, for the rest of her life, was a committed communist, a trade union leader, and worked tirelessly for the coming of a democratic South Africa and for the ANC. Of course, during the emergency, which I don't suppose the 2 of you know about, of 1960, my father was arrested and he was detained, and my mother went into hiding. That was another quite a pivotal moment in my life, as was the Philip Kusana March, which I witnessed. When my parents went into exile, I went to boarding school, my brother went to boarding school. At the end of that year, that's 65, he joined my parents in Manchester, where they were for a while, because my father had been awarded a fellowship at the University of Manchester, and my sister was in a university residence. In 1967, on their way to Manchester, they'd stopped by in Lusaka and bought a plot and arranged to have a house built. So at the end of 67, they came to Lusaka, and my sister and I joined them for that holiday. They made their life, their home there. So this is 67. I used to visit them as often as I could. My parents, however, remained very politically active. My mother worked for the ILO for a while. She used to attend meetings in Eastern Europe and in Geneva and in Cuba on behalf of the trade union movement. My father participated in many conferences, and they were present at the very important ANC conference when it was decided that whites could be admitted to join the ranks of the ANC. My father and my mother, my father wrote copiously, and very fortunately for many, many scholars in the field of South African history, trade union history and political history, the Simons papers are housed in the University of Cape Town in the Manuscripts and Archives Department, and are a very, very useful source of information for scholars.
What led to your mother being banned?
Well, my mother was banned because she was politically active and she was considered a danger to the state. Ditto my father, okay. What it meant for her to be banned was she was confined. She couldn't work. She couldn't be in the company of more than one other person. And she certainly couldn't continue with her trade union duties. So she wasn't able to go out and address workers. And for my father, it meant that he wasn't able to teach, he wasn't able to disseminate information. He was restricted to the Cape Town district, which is why we couldn't go to our home on Onrust. The house was sold, and that was it.
When your parents were they in Lusaka, or?
They were in Lusaka.
Okay, and then were you able to keep in touch with them at all during that time?
Well, I wrote copious letters, and I still have all the letters that they wrote to me. And there was a time when they had a telephone and I had a telephone, so we were able to speak over the telephone. And we did communicate. And when I was there, it was a very, very busy household. There were lots of people coming to the house. Oliver Tambo, Joe Slovo, Jeremy Cronin. I mean, the list can go on. There were many people coming to the house. Ruth Momparty, who was Oliver Tambo's secretary and the secretary of the ANC. She was his secretary when he was a lawyer in Johannesburg, but she lived in a cottage on the property, and it was a very, very busy house. But again, I had to remain, what can I say? In the shadows.
And even though you remained in the shadows, did you have access to, could you hear what they were talking about? And what
to a certain degree, yes, to a certain degree. But, you know, I could not be involved in the conversations. Oh, I was asked many times about the situation in South Africa, whether I thought the AWB would win an election. I said I didn't think so. I didn't think it had a snowball's chance in hell. But, you know, the general idea was that that they knew that I would be penalized or questioned or something by the security police. And so I kept in the shadows.
And with your mother's work, with the trade union work and addressing, you know, before she was banned, did you ever accompany her to any of those?
Oh, I'm sure that I must have. I'm sure that I must have. I certainly accompanied her to, she didn't drive, so very often my father would take her to places, and I, no doubt that I tagged along. Mm.
And do you know what else, maybe what
But you know, you're asking me, I'm 75, it's a long time ago. And a lot of things have happened since.
Is there anything else that you can share, like just moments about your mother and her, maybe pivotal moments?
Yes, well, what I do want to say is that my mother, who accomplished a lot, she probably would not have been able to do half of what she did if she hadn't had the unwavering support of my father, who was an equally remarkable man. And I think that that needs to be acknowledged. He was very supportive of her. They didn't necessarily always agree with everything, but they supported each other. And it was a wonderful marriage.
I think one question that I would have is, what was it that politicized your mother, or made her conscious of
what politicized my mother?
Yeah, was there a moment, you think, because you said from a very early
age? It's a very interesting question.
Was there a trigger, at some point where she...
Okay. Her father was a very liberal man. That is not the word I want to say. A very far-sighted man. She grew up in Latvia. So she was born at the end of 1913, when the World War I was in progress, okay. And her father had a very good friend called Lib Joffe, who was very active in the village, and he and her father picked up that my mother was very, very bright, and she was from a very early age introduced to literature, to pamphlets. She was participated in conversations. She grew up in an Orthodox Jewish home, but learned to question many things. And certainly by the time she was in a very early teen, she was very, very highly politicized. She was asked to join a number of youth movements, and this became more so once she went to Riga. So when she came to South Africa, she was highly politicized. And I just wanted to mention also that my grandmother had spent some time in Leeds, and so she knew about a wider world than the settlement of the Pale in Latvia. So I think there were all these influences that had a bearing on my mother. One of her sisters also became politically active, my Aunt Dora. I think that combination of a curious mind and a father who was interested in her, and who introduced her to his friends, and who introduced her to literature. I think this all combined. And so she also had a very, very strong sense of what was right. So I think that was a combination. And she was also had a very strong sense of justice. Now, why does one have that? Some people, more than others, have that, and they drive along with it. And she was one of those people, and my father too. I mean, my father came from a totally different background, born in South Africa, but he also experiences in his life enable him to think about things differently. And I think that is what is necessary, to make people aware of